Hi, everyone. Welcome to the live stream. Today, we are talking about power dynamics and the nervous system. Super excited to get into this topic. Before I get into it, I want to just start by introducing myself. My name is Opulence Abundance. I'm a speaker, a healing professional, a facilitator, and a conflict navigator. Um, and I appreciate all of these roles. Right now, I'm in an EMDR training. So EMDR stands for, hey, Stephen, stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. So I'm learning all this stuff on like how we can move our eyes to like literally heal our nervous systems from trauma. And I think it's a really interesting thing to learn while also actively working to like navigate conflicts. But normally, each time I start with a reading and then we do something somatic and then I talk about the topic. And today I'm not actually going to read a poem, but I want to share this diagram. Okay, let's see. Let's see if I can share the screen with you. Okay, so you all should be able to see the screen, to see the slide by Kai Chang Tom. I think this slide is super interesting. Let me know if you can't see it. But anyways, the slide is super interesting. And what we're looking at is a grid, like we have an x-axis and a y-axis, right? There's like a circle that's been cut into quadrants. And there are 3 overlapping circles. So in the closest ones, we see the quadrants are fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And these are our survival states. So when we get activated, we go into a fight, which means we are literally ready to like throw a punch at whatever the threat is. Or we go into flight, we're ready to run, right? And fight and flight, these are both considered hypoarousals. So what that means are hyperarousals. So that means that our bodies are going to go into super speed. Our heart rate's going to increase. We're going to feel more energy, more adrenaline. Our body will numb out pain. On the other end of that, we have things called hypoarousal. So responses where our body might shut down, also numb pain, go into dissociation, go into paralysis, right? Think of a possum. So for the fight and flight, maybe think of like a leopard, right? Or like a big cat ready to fight. They're feeling all that adrenaline, hunting prey. For the hypo, think you are the prey. Okay, you're not the predator. And so you're going to go into paralysis. So we have freeze and fawn. Freeze literally being like when you think of a possum, you can't move, your body numbs out, disassociate. Fawning is a more like newly discovered survival response, and it's linked to something called polyvagal theory. So people are still learning about it. But fawning is basically when we don't think we can escape, we can't fight the threat, but we have to stay engaged. So we'll still have the symptoms of a freeze, but we might be smiling, nodding, and doing whatever we can to appease the threat, to flatter the threat. I know an example of this that people have talked about is when Bob Marley's, I believe, granddaughter had the cops called on her when she was leaving an Airbnb. And there was an interview done with the cops that were called out and with the granddaughter, where like the women involved were like, yeah, that was traumatic. We feel traumatized. The cops were like, oh, we were joking. We were laughing. Right. And so they often talk about appeasement as like when nodding or saying yes is not agreement. So the cops were like, no, they were fine. They were joyful. But actually, that's an example of a fawn response where they felt they had to flatter, and not just felt like, it seems like the reality, right? They had to laugh. They had to joke. It wasn't that that laughter was coming from a place of activation, not from like actually thinking the joke is funny. I know we have a comedian on the call with us today, so I'm sure you can appreciate that distinction. Okay, so these are kind of our survival responses. So when we're in a position of power under, and to talk about the terms power under, power over. Power under is like when we feel that things are happening to us, or that literally we're in some dynamic where we have less power and someone has power over us. And I want to name that this is a state of mind. So we can perceive and like hold a state of mind that's like, life happens to me. I don't have choice. The choices I make don't matter. I am constantly under the demand of everyone. Or we can have a power over, which is like, I can influence my life. My choices matter. I'm not saying one is inherently more true for anyone or one is better than the other, but I do want to acknowledge that I see people in both mindsets, sometimes regardless of the realities of the situation. So I think there is a way where you can be in many power under dynamics, but still have a power over mindset. And similarly, I see, especially just to call it out, with like a lot of white women executive directors, there's very often this feeling of like, I have to defer to everyone else, or I have the illusion of having choice, but actually everyone around me has more power than me. But at the same time, they are the executive director, right? And so I sometimes see people with a very deeply ingrained power under mindset, maybe even resentment tied to that, while simultaneously making a lot of decisions or holding a lot of literal power. And I think to me, what stands out there is just that like power is complex and power is related to how we it's oftentimes we might be socialized into embodying power in a certain way. So power is just like a part of it is also how our own relationship to power, and a part of it is also related to our past. And I think that is what, when we talk about activation, when we talk about the nervous system, we are inherently talking about the past. And people pathologize the nervous system. People pathologize being triggered. But in truth, of course, there can be a pathology if you're triggered all the time, if you can't manage your emotions. Simultaneously, our nervous system is there to help us survive. These reactions are there for our survival. And there may also be a reason why we have these relationships to power. Ultimately, we get to change our lives and we get to choose to have the relationships we want to power, as well as the relationship we want to activation. It just takes a little bit of intention. So, returning to this diagram that we're breaking down, which, by the way, this diagram is by Kai Cheng Tom, an incredible conflict navigator. So we have our states. So when we look at how, let's say, like a fight response might show up if someone is in a power under position, that looks like resistance, right? So whether it's protesters resisting US state power, the resistance, or even if it's an employee resisting their boss's demands, that fight response, if it's coming from a place of activation, it'll look like resisting power when you're in a power under position. If you're in a power under position and you have a flight response, that can look like escape, right? And when we talk about power under and power over for these different responses, to me, it helps to think of a parent and a child. So when a child fights their parents, they're resisting their parents' authority, one way to look at it. When a child has a flight response, maybe they run away from home, they escape the situation, right? When there's a fawn response, it's power under, you're appeasing the person in power. The child metaphor doesn't work great there, but just doing things so that, you please the person, maybe being a teacher's pet. And then finally, freezing. When you're in a power under situation and you freeze, you're enduring the situation. When we look at these same responses from a power over position, so if someone in power chooses to fight someone they have, so like a cop, right? or a parent. If a parent chooses to fight their child, if they have that trauma response, that's violence, right? And then if a parent chooses to has a flight response to responsibility, then they aren't escaping, they're abandoning responsibility. If someone has a fawn response and they're in power, what may have looked as like appeasement in power under looks like manipulation in power over. And then for the freeze, imagine a parent while freezing when you're power under, it's like, okay, you're enduring, you're getting through the situation. Freezing when you have responsibility and are in a power over position, that looks like neglect. So I just thought that this image was super powerful as a way to kind of understand and think through how our actions change when power is involved. Yeah, very dense. Okay, so thank you everyone for sticking around through that share. I think some good somatics today would be one that we have done before, which is where we're just going to thump our chest kind of 3 times. So it'll go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And then we'll thump the side of our arms. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. We'll thump our lower back. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And then just the side of our legs. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So we're talking about power. And let me know in the comments how you relate to power, what your relationship to power is like. I think one thing that I want to name in this conversation is that we can be in a position of power, placed in a position of power. But if we do not process that and integrate that, right? I don't know if you've ever heard a parent say like, oh, my child's manipulating me, or oh, I'm being manipulated by my employees, and how much anger can come with that. When parents say that about their children, if you think about the diagram I just showed you, it's like, is it possible for a child to manipulate an adult? Maybe. When we think about a teenager, of course there can be lying and stealing, right? Or like lying and other behaviors. And when we think about a 5-year-old child, can a 5-year-old child manipulate a grown adult? In both cases, whether a teen or a child, there can be deception, right? There can be attempts to get another person to do what they want or to get their needs met. But ultimately, when we think of a 5-year-old child and an adult, there's a differential in power and resources, so that like we don't think of the child as being in a power over that adult just because of the developmental differences. When we think about a workplace where people are on more even footing, but we think of a boss and an employee, again, the question comes up, like, can an employee manipulate their boss? Maybe, because everyone's developmentally on the same level. Simultaneously, when we think of a boss that might take their employees' ideas, gossip about their employee, or lie about their employee's behavior, we see that someone in a position of power, like being someone's supervisor, has more tools, and it is just more sinister for them to attempt to manipulate or distort the character of someone they have power over. Versus when we think of an employee trying to manipulate someone in power over them, we can see those as attempts. We can see they may be deceptive, but they lack the power fundamentally for the actions to have the same impact. I hope this is making sense. I think what I'm just driving at is that power matters, and I think these are the 2 big things from this talk. One, that we may be in a position of leadership, but we may still perceive ourselves in a power under position. In that situation, we are set up to cause harm, because when we are power under, we're saying, I'm being forced to make these decisions. And that can prevent us from taking accountability for actions, or actually acknowledging and holding the true power that we have. That's kind of one piece of this. The other piece of this is that whether we're in leadership or we're an employee, whether we're power over, power under in the literal power dynamics of our lives, we will still have nervous system responses. But our position in power changes those responses. So if we're in a position of power and we have that fight response, it is violence, right? Whereas if we're in a power under and we have that fight response, it's resistance. And those are just two very dramatic ways of it holding power. I think I'm just circling those same points. I'm circling those same points. So when we think about our nervous system, when we hold power, it's so important to have a resilient nervous system and to develop that window of tolerance so that we are not easily activated. And that when we are activated, we're able to catch ourselves and we're able to take appropriate steps so that we do not use our power to lash out. I think I'm also advocating to say that if you supervise someone, if you give someone money, if there's any dynamic, right, of you being older than someone, there's power dynamics. So different powers, power of position, right? Power of age or experience. Power can exist absolutely in relation to race and the ism. So race, money, being perceived of having more of these things all generate like almost what I would say like a societal power, right? And then there's personal power. So there's all these dimensions of power. We can hold power with, we can hold power alongside, right? A domination model is one where it's like, okay, there's power over and there's power under, and that's it. And I would say that power over and power under are almost like two sides of the same coin. And I noticed in people who sometimes have a real internalized power under, they will also try and micromanage, right? They will try and assert a very intensive power over. And so I really think that my ideal personally is for us to hold that power with position, which also looks like consciously working to keep our nervous system separate from others. And there's something called enmeshment. And that's when we like merge our feelings with another person. This happens a lot during a fawn response. So one way we can hold power ethically is to be mindful of boundaries and the limits of our feelings. Understand how we feel about something is not how someone else feels about something. I think that's the important piece to say. And so when we can do that, we can also kind of transcend our nervous systems a little bit when we can hold these boundaries to say, like, just because I'm highly anxious doesn't automatically mean that this person I hold power over is highly anxious. Or if they're very anxious, I need to obviously be an ethical person, show up, do my due diligence, but not take that anxiety on as my own. I feel here I'm making less sense and maybe a time to end this live. But thank you for being with me and looking at this chart and just exploring these dynamics of power. I can see that this is like a popular topic, and I think I'm still like learning how to talk about it. So if you watch this, let me know, leave some comments. Let me know what you want to hear more about. Okay, bye everyone.